In the winter of 1930, a trapper traveling through the remote northern wilderness approached a settlement he had visited many times before. Smoke usually rose from its huts. Dogs barked, lamps glowed faintly against the long Arctic night. This time there was nothing, no movement, no sound, only the cold. The settlement stood near Lake Anjikuni, far from any major settlement, accessible only by long journeys across frozen terrain. The families who lived there depended on hunting, fishing, and careful preparation for winter. Survival required cooperation, routine, and constant attention to the environment. Abandoning shelter without cause would have been unthinkable. Yet as the traveler entered the village, he found it deserted. Inside the huts, tools lay where they had been left. Cooking pots still contained food, frozen solid. Personal belongings remained undisturbed. Clothing, weapons, supplies essential for survival. Nothing appeared packed. Nothing suggested an orderly departure. Outside, the silence deepened. Sled dogs, usually restless and loud, were nowhere to be seen. The only tracks were old ones, half filled by drifting snow. No fresh footprints led away from the settlement. No clear trail pointed toward another camp. It was as though life had paused mid-movement and never resumed. Concerned, the trapper searched the surrounding area. He called out. No reply came back across the frozen landscape. Smoke did not rise from any distant fire. No figures appeared on the horizon. The settlement seemed cut off not only from people, but from activity itself. Later accounts claimed something even more unsettling. Some reported that the dogs had been found dead, still tethered, having starved despite nearby supplies of food that had not been used. Others described graves that appeared disturbed, though details varied and were never fully confirmed. In the absence of clear records, rumor began to fill the empty spaces. Authorities were eventually notified, and an investigation was attempted. But the region's isolation, extreme weather, and the passage of time made thorough examination difficult. No definitive explanation emerged. No confirmed sightings of the villagers appeared elsewhere. No evidence of migration, conflict, or disease was documented in a way that resolved the disappearance. Possible explanations ranged from natural disaster to relocation driven by scarce resources. Harsh winters could deplete hunting grounds, forcing communities to move quickly in search of survival. Illness could also compel departure if remaining meant certain death. Yet even these possibilities left questions. Why leave food behind? Why leave equipment essential for travel? Why abandon the very items that made survival possible in such a climate? The Arctic environment erases traces efficiently. Snow covers tracks within hours. Wind reshapes the land continuously. A path that exists one day can vanish the next, leaving no indication that anyone passed through at all. In such conditions, absence can become permanent with unsettling ease. Over time, the story spread beyond the region, growing quieter or more dramatic, depending on who told it. Some emphasized the mystery, others dismissed it as misunderstanding or exaggeration. Without detailed contemporary records, certainty remained out of reach. What persisted was the image of a village standing intact, yet empty, as though its inhabitants had stepped away briefly and never returned. Today, the area around the lake remains remote and sparsely populated. Seasons cycle through long darkness and brief summers of constant light. Ice forms, melts, and forms again. Nature continues without pause. If the villagers traveled elsewhere, their destination left no widely recognized trace. If they perished, The land kept its silence. Standing in such a place, one becomes aware of how fragile human presence can be against the scale of the environment. Homes, tools, routines, all depend on continuity. When that continuity breaks, what remains can feel less like ruins and more like interruption, an unfinished sentence in wood and snow. Perhaps the community moved under urgent circumstances, planning to return once conditions improved. Perhaps events unfolded too quickly for planning. Or perhaps the explanation was simple but undocumented, lost as memories faded and witnesses disappeared. History sometimes leaves questions not because answers never existed, but because they were never written down. The lake itself reflects the sky with indifferent clarity. In winter, it becomes a flat expanse of white, indistinguishable from the surrounding land except for subtle shifts in texture. Wind moves across it without obstruction, carrying fine crystals of ice that hiss softly against clothing. Sound travels far, but not far enough to retrieve voices that have already gone. What remains is the quiet. A place where signs of habitation once stood, then did not. A story defined less by what happened than by the absence of anything afterward. Human settlements usually leave traces, descendants, artifacts, memories carried forward by neighbors. Here, continuity simply stops. The line of daily life ends abruptly, like a trail disappearing beneath fresh snowfall. No marker indicates where it continues. No path leads onward. Perhaps that is why the account endures, not as a tale of catastrophe, but as a reminder of how easily ordinary life can slip beyond the reach of documentation. A community may exist, work, speak, and endure for years, yet leave only faint impressions once it is gone, especially in a landscape vast enough to absorb almost anything. The wind moves across the frozen lake as it always has, indifferent to human absence or presence. Snow falls, melts, and falls again. New tracks appear, animal, not human, then fade. Nothing announces what once stood there. Nothing explains why it vanished. Only the idea remains, a cluster of homes beside cold water, lights once glowing in winter darkness, voices carried briefly across the ice. Then silence, and a shoreline returned to emptiness as though waiting for footsteps that never came back.